Hello and welcome back once again to the Level Up English podcast. As you may already know, the best place to come to practice the English language, learn about the British accent and culture, and much, much more with me, your host, Michael Lavers. And today I have the great pleasure of talking with Paola from the Talaera Talks podcast and Talaera Talks website as well. So we will talk more about what that is in the episode today. I should also say this is a cross-posted episode, so some people will be listening to this episode over on the Talaera Talks podcast, and of course you are listening here on my podcast. So if you like what you hear today, you can go over and check out the Talaera Talks podcast. And if you have come from their podcast over to my podcast and you're listening for the first time, then a big welcome to you. Really hope that you enjoy this episode or other episodes as well. But welcome to everyone today. Paola is one of the teachers over at Talaera Talks, and their podcast has well over 100 episodes at this point. So if you're looking for another podcast to listen to, it might be a nice one to start with. They focus a lot on business English and helping non-native English learners, maybe like yourself, take your careers, take your jobs to that next level. So it's a great little area to talk about, and it's quite different to what I do generally as well. So in the podcast today, we talk a little bit about work and careers and stuff like that. We talk about what a non-native English speaker can do. Like, say, if you want to get a job in an English-speaking country, what can you do? That's a question I get asked all the time. So there might be some good advice for you in this episode. We'll also talk about managing stress and work-life balance a little bit as well. And then we have a really interesting segment all about kind of workplace business idioms. And as usual, these are going to be not only relevant for the workplace, but also for general life as well. So if you want to learn some very natural English expressions, idioms, and maybe they'll be good for your work as well in the future, this is a great episode to listen to, where we will be challenging each other to think about examples and define each idiom. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed recording it. And just one more thing to note, that if you do find it challenging to keep up with the pace of our conversation and maybe Paola and my different accents, then you might consider becoming a member at Level Up English, where you can read the transcript. So that basically highlights all the words that I'm saying at the same time I'm saying it. It's a really nice way to train your listening skills and kind of match what you hear to what you're seeing as well in terms of the subtitles, the words. So that's really nice. And of course, as a member, you get so many more, dozens more benefits as well. Courses, group classes, private podcast episodes, so much more. It's a great way to support me and help me continue with this podcast as well. So if you like my podcast, it's something you might consider doing. But yeah, thank you if you will consider it. I'll leave it here. I'll stop rambling for now. Let's get into our conversation with Paola. I hope you enjoy it, and let's learn more about what she does.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Paola from Talaera Talks, and today I am talking to Michael from the Level Up English podcast. Hi, Michael. How are you today?
Hello, I am fantastic. Yes, I'm Michael from Level Up English podcast, as you said, calling from across the world, right? Thailand and Spain, is that right?
That's exactly it. Yeah, so Talaera is all the way in New York to add a little bit more diversity to the conversation, but I am based in Spain, yeah, and super excited to have this conversation with you today.
Me too. Thank you so much. Yes, it's amazing that the internet can connect us in that way. So yeah, I'm glad we could find a time to talk. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me as well. As you know, this episode will be shared both on Talaera Talks and the Level Up English podcast. So I encourage you to actually check out both, because we have a bunch of resources and tips to help you communicate with confidence in English. And, the topic that we have today is career progression. You learn vocabulary, you learn tips. But before we get started, Michael, should we just share a little bit of an overview of our shows?
We can do, of course. Yeah, yeah. So for the Level Up English podcast, we've been going for a few years now, and the way that we've done it has changed over the years, but these days it's become very casual and conversational, where sometimes it's me on my own, sometimes it's me with a guest. It depends, a guest like today. And what I try to do is pick random topics to talk about and extract some English learning stuff from those topics. Try to make it more enjoyable to listen to rather than just like a grammar lesson in a podcast. So that's basically what I do, and obviously we focus on British English because that is where I'm from, and it's a lot of fun. But how about for you?
I love it. Yeah, I actually found out about your podcast on Instagram. I think you do a fantastic job. So really, everyone listening, go check it out. We'll leave all the links later in the description. So as for Talaera Talks, we offer business English communications training. So it's a little bit more specific. It's English for work, whatever you need. We blend language training with soft skills, cross-cultural skills, and business communication. So it's a little bit more targeted in the sense of, if you need to get a job in an international market, or you feel like you need to build your confidence, and that's where we come in. And we also have guests on our podcast, especially lately. Before, we used to have a bit more of a variety, but today we bring in experts from different fields, and we have a conversation just like today.
Fantastic. Just minus the expert today. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in anything, but yeah.
You are. You certainly
really
cool.
are. So you've definitely niched down more than I have, right? You've got a more specific area like business English. So I think hopefully it will benefit my audience as well, because it's a very common question that I get, and it's not something that I'm super familiar with. So I'll be interested to discuss this with you today.
Sounds great. So I actually have the first question that we can talk about, and that is, one of the most common questions that we often get is, all right, I just got a job in a new industry, or I just started a new job. What are some effective ways to learn the ropes?
Very
What would you
nice.
say there, Michael? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm trying to think back to a job that I had before. I think it's always very scary when you first start a new job and you have no idea what you're doing, and everyone knows apart from you, and it's really scary. And one thing that stuck with me was just not being afraid to ask questions. I feel like when you start a new job, you feel this pressure like you should know what you're doing, but of course you don't know. So in order to learn the ropes, I suppose just ask questions. And there's a saying that I remember from school, which is that there's no such thing as a bad question. Any question is good because it's a chance to learn. So that's one thing that stuck with me specifically from my time working in restaurants, where I didn't really know what I was doing.
You're so right. And I love that you started with that. Is when we start a new job, we feel like we need to, we were hired to do this, so I'm supposed to know this. If I ask a bad question, as you said, am I going to look like I don't deserve this job? But actually what it shows is that you are proactive. And that is kind of related to the tip that you just shared. Is, I would say, seek feedback. Ask colleagues, or ask your manager, how am I doing? How can I be 1% better? And what are some effective ways for me to just do my job better? So I think that also works a lot. And I think managers tend to appreciate that a lot as well, because it shows that you're willing to learn and get better.
Yeah. I guess the fear that we have is that asking a question or asking for feedback is going to show us it's like a sign of weakness. But I think the opposite is true, like you said, isn't it? They'll be impressed that you're trying to go to that next level. So it's a nice thing to do. I wonder if you've had any personal experience with this as well in previous jobs, perhaps, like I have?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, when I started working at Talaera, we do, as I said, business English training, and I've been an instructor for almost 15 years, which makes me sound older than what I am. But um, and then at some point, I transitioned to a marketing role, and there I really had to learn the ropes. Right, I had to learn how things worked. I had to learn what the role was even about because I didn't come from a marketing background. And so what I did is I really asked a lot of questions, and I keep asking for feedback to my colleagues, my manager. The other thing that I found super helpful has been to ask to be a fly on the wall. That's another idiom there, a fly on the wall, right? When you ask to observe others during a meeting without participating. And it may sound odd at the beginning, but it's one of my favorite career tips ever. It allows you to observe either a meeting, a presentation, even like day to day operations. And you can really get the nuances of communication. You see how things just work, and you really understand the dynamics within a team. So, yeah, ask to be a fly on the wall. I It really helped me.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a good tip as well. Fly on the wall. And I wonder if this is a good time to explain that first expression, like learn the ropes. I wonder if it comes from sailing. I actually don't know. I'm only guessing, but maybe from like being on a ship, like sailing. But it's like learning. You can correct me if I'm a bit wrong, but like learning how to do something when you're very new at doing it. Is that right?
That's exactly it. And it does come from sailing, where you need to learn how to use the ropes to actually, be able to navigate, in this case, a new
Mm.
situation. So yeah, you're totally right. To learn the ropes, to understand, to learn how things work, especially in a new job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Do you have any more examples, or do you want to move on to another area?
Yeah, so I think here we just to recap some of the tips that we shared today on learning the ropes. You mentioned asking questions, even if they sound, basic, or if they sound like, too obvious to you. Ask questions,
Mm.
seek feedback, ask to be a fly on the wall, right? Observe meetings without participating. I would also say if you can get a mentor, someone who can guide you and share their experience, that is always super helpful. So yeah, I think that already gives a lot of insights into learning the ropes. Now, the other question that I get is, sometimes we're working in international environments, and we feel like it's too much. It's we're overwhelmed, and we feel like throwing in the towel. Have
Mm.
you ever felt like that? I know, everything you've done, Michael, with the podcast and your different social media channels. It really is impressive. But have you ever felt like throwing in the towel?
Very good question. I well, I've certainly felt that way with previous jobs I've had. With the current stuff that I do, like the podcast and everything, I would never go so far as to say I've wanted to throw in the towel. However, there have been times where I think this is quite relatable, where I've thought how nice it would be not to have to be so connected to the internet, not to worry about social media and always checking emails and updating things. Because whenever I have some time away from that, it's always so relaxing. Just in the forest, going for a hike. I think, why am I going to go back to social media after this? What's the purpose? But then somehow I always do. I guess there's some benefit there for me. But I thought about throwing in the napkin, not the full towel, maybe just like it's crossed my mind, but I don't think I would ever give up because I enjoy it too much. But how about you?
That's awesome. Yeah, I felt like that when I started with marketing, just what I shared before. I have a background in, as I said, business communication, communication in general, also psychology. So at first it did feel like, oh, it is a nice blend of skills. Um, but after some time, and especially last year, was really intense in the global market. And I don't know if our listeners may feel that way, but it did feel much slower than usual. And there were times where maybe it did cross my mind that maybe it was time to throw in the towel. But then, I evaluated my situation and I thought, well, I have a lot of opportunities, for growth, and I I love my job, and I feel a sense of purpose, and I feel like those are some of the elements that tell you, okay, go on, keep going. Don't throw in
Mm,
the towel. Maybe now we can briefly explain what we actually mean by throwing in the towel.
yeah, I think it's good to explain it a little bit later, isn't it? So people can think about it. Maybe they can guess what it means before we tell them. That could be a good way of learning. But yeah, again, I can try this one. Maybe I'll let you go next time. But I think it just means giving up, basically, to stop doing what you're doing. Yeah, give up on your task. And I wonder if it comes from, you might know this already. Is it wrestling or boxing or something like that?
That's exactly it. Yeah, I think it comes from boxing, where
Mm,
those who throw in the towel, so usually you have a towel, and then when you throw it in on the floor, then it just means I give up. I don't want to go on fighting. I'm done. I give up. I throw in the towel.
yeah. And it's usually like this feeling of like being defeated, like you just can't continue any longer. And yeah, I guess there have been some times where I've thrown in the towel on specific areas of my work. Like, was it last year or 2 years ago? I stopped doing private lessons just because I found I was doing the podcast and everything else, and it was way too much for me. And it was, I was starting to burn out. So I kind of threw in the towel on the private lessons, but I could always pick it back up again in the future, couldn't I?
Exactly, exactly. I feel like that with German, learning German. I feel like it's one of
Mm,
those that I've tried a couple of times and I threw in the towel. It was too much for me. But as you said, maybe at some point I could, you know, try again.
yeah, yeah. Never say never. Yeah, never,
Never say
never give
never.
up forever.
Love it.
Yeah, great example.
Great. So we're talking about career development. We talked about ways to learn the ropes. Also, when you want to throw in the towel, really think about your situation and the opportunities that you have for growth and development, and whether it aligns with your values. Um, have you ever? So the other thing that I also hear, some of the questions that we get is I want to invest in career development and I want to get better, but I feel like it's always the same and I'm a little bit stuck. And sometimes I tell people, well, you should think outside the box when it comes to career development. Um, have you ever had to think outside the box in your professional development, for example?
This is a really tough one, but a great expression, and I think it's probably very common for entrepreneurs and people doing their own business, where in order to succeed, you might have to do something a little bit different, think outside the box, and come up with some new creative ways to get something done. And when have I done that? I I'm not sure if this really counts, but I don't want to spend too long thinking about it. But when I first started the podcast, I don't know if you were the same, but I was like copying other people's style a lot because I didn't really know how to do a podcast. So I was heavily getting inspiration from other people, maybe the topics they spoke about or the kind of format that they did the podcast in. And over time, after a few weeks or months, I eventually got my own style and I kind of decided to go my own way a little bit more. And I guess there's an element of thinking outside the box here, which is not following what everyone else is doing and trying to do something in your own way and being a bit creative with it. Trying to think of an example of what that could be. Like, what do I do differently? I think the idea is there, even if I don't have an example to back it up. But am I making sense? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I love what you said, from going to mirroring other styles that you
Mm.
liked to actually saying, okay, what do I want my style to be? What do I want my show to feel like? And that's where you had to think outside the box and say, okay, I'm just going to be creative. I'm going to be, my own creator of my own show. And I think it makes total sense for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of following someone else's path, you do your own and you just do what you think is best. And sometimes that involves being really creative and not copying someone else. But I wish my brain was working better to think of some examples. But I don't know if you have any examples that you could help me with.
So I have a very recent example. I went back to university. This is about career development, and I went back to university last year to study clinical psychology. And
Mm.
um, and I had a lot of exams, and I really didn't have time to study. But I thought it was important for my career development, and so what I did is I fed ChatGPT. I trained a ChatGPT to read all the course textbooks and to actually know what it was about. And then I trained it to test me on the different concepts with questions that would really force me to think creatively. So it was not just this is the concept and here's the definition, but more of a here's a practical example. How would you apply the theory to this example? And it really, really helped. It helped me pass the exams that I had. So, and it was with minimal time investment because I couldn't just afford to really read through all the documents and textbooks. And maybe it's not the best way to learn, but it really felt like I had to think outside the box to actually get it done.
That's a really good example. I like that. So I guess, lots of people are using ChatGPT and language models like that now. So that's not that unique in itself, but I think you can be really creative and think outside the box in how you use it. So if you have like a deadline, you've got to read a book or something, by tomorrow, one person could just read the book really quickly, stay up all night reading it. Maybe if you're thinking outside the box, you might put it in ChatGPT and say, give me a summary, and that will be more efficient, maybe.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Or like for example, it can be really small examples. I love reading, but I also don't have time to read as much as I would like, and so I have books as text, and then I also have audiobooks, and they help me really get all that knowledge while I do other things like maybe cooking or just tidying up the house. And I am listening to those books that I like. So I know it's not super creative, but for me, it was a little bit of a, how can I think outside the box to really achieve my goals?
Yeah. And sometimes it's those small things that make a big impact on your life, right? And save you time and give you happiness. But I don't know, maybe it's your turn to help define this expression this time.
Yeah, I'll give it a try. So I'm not sure about the origin of thinking outside the box, but the meaning is to think creatively, to just come up with original ways to solve a problem. So instead of going the traditional way of doing things, then you think outside the box, you think creatively and come up with original ways to go about it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I also have no idea where it could come from, but if you imagine the box and going outside, it kind of visually makes sense, doesn't it? So yeah, it's a great one to use.
Great. Awesome. Great.
Hmm.
What else do we have on the topic of career progression?
Career progression. We could talk about when things don't go right, perhaps, and you have to go back to the drawing board. Either, I don't know, it could be a big thing or a small thing, right? I wonder if you've had any setbacks in your life, in your career, perhaps. You don't have to uh, get too personal, I suppose, but where you've had to go back to the drawing board and rethink what direction you're going in life?
Um, yeah, maybe in a way. So I lived in Vietnam for 3 years, and I was teaching English in different companies, just helping professionals communicate in English with confidence. And then I decided to move to Europe. I moved to Berlin, and when I got there, the school year usually starts in Europe. It usually starts in September, and I got there in October. All the schools were all covered, fully covered with all the teachers they needed. So it was really, really hard to actually find a job. I did get some, but it was like smaller private classes here and there. And so I felt like, okay, I need to go back to the drawing board. Maybe this is not my place. This is not my job, at least for this year. So what am I going to do? And I had never, this was many years ago. And so I felt like I had to reassess my skills and the options that I had. And I actually started to look online, which now feels very obvious. So if you cannot teach at different schools, then why don't you teach online? But back then, this was like maybe 10 years ago, it was really not such a thing. And maybe that was also my way of thinking outside the box. But it did feel like I
Mm.
had to go back to drawing board. And I did continue to teach, but I did find an online job. I had also done a little bit of translation work. And so I felt, okay, now it is the moment to actually complement what I do with, translating again. Um, so yeah, that would be, I think, the time where I really thought, right, time to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I like how you use both expressions there too. That's really good. Great idea. Um, it also reminded me of something a bit similar for me. I guess there's so many things I could match it to here, but one, like, it could be a really big thing or a small thing. Like, a really big thing for me was for several years I used to work as a gardener. That was my main job, where I was planting flowers and cutting grass every day. And then I just kind of got not quite burnt out. I just got bored, I suppose. So then I went back to the drawing board on that career progression, and I went traveling, and I really consciously thought about what I wanted to do. And I decided that I love languages, I love traveling. So why not get a job where I can try to combine them and do some traveling while I teach languages? So that was my motivation to start this work many years ago. And yes, I went back to the drawing board, and maybe I thought outside the box to think about something a little bit different that none of my friends were doing at the time, especially much more rare before COVID. The people weren't doing so much of this kind of stuff, I suppose. And yeah, so I guess a little bit similar to you as well.
I always love to hear stories about career changes and how you ended up where you are. So thank you for sharing that. Love it.
Yeah, me too. Whenever someone tells me they've just quit their job, my first word is always, congratulations. Because for some people it's a bad thing, but I think it's usually a sign of a good change. You know, you're making a big change in your life, which is scary, but hopefully good.
I couldn't agree more. I always really I love change. People are often reluctant to change, but I kind of like it. Even if it hurts a little at the beginning, it always brings in so many opportunities for growth, and it forces you to really think, okay, what now? And I feel like we often don't ask that to ourselves, right? We don't stop and think, okay, what
Yeah,
do I want? What is going to be my next step? So yeah, I agree with you.
yeah, very nice. Glad we agree.
Awesome.
And did we explain this one? No, we didn't really talk about this one, did we? Go back to the drawing board.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I suppose this comes from like a drawing board. It's like making a plan or something, isn't it? Like you're writing on a board, I guess. But it really means to start from scratch, start from the beginning. So you're progressing on some plan, and then something goes wrong and you have to start from the beginning again. So you're back to the drawing board, back to the original planning stage, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I always imagine, creating or building a building, and then at the beginning you have to like kind of do the little drawing, and then of course it becomes something big and robust. But at the beginning you're just coming up with the main idea, you're coming up with the outline, And that is exactly, as you said, the planning stage. And sometimes you start building that structure and it's not working. So you actually have to go back to the drawing board. You have to go back to the beginning and rethink your strategy.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I think all of these expressions are so common as well. They're not just like random ones that we never use. They're like everyday expressions, especially in business English. So they're all good.
Absolutely. I can't believe how often they're used, I think, in life in general. But if you join uh, an international company, then you'll realize, wow, they're used all the time, truly all the time.
Mm.
So for sure. And our audience is mostly not native English learners, and a lot of them may be wondering, all right, great, I would love to get a job in an English company. How do I do that? I feel like I can understand what, perhaps, I'm sure they understand what we are talking about. Their English might be okay, but from your English being okay to feeling like you can actually get a job at an international company, there's sometimes a bit of a stretch. Do you have any thoughts, any advice for those of us listening to us and who are in that situation?
This is a huge topic, but I'll see what I can come up with. I do get this question a lot, and I've been actually meaning to get a guest on the podcast to talk about this topic alone. So I don't know if maybe we'll talk again in the future. But yeah, I don't have the best experience because I've never been in that situation trying to get a job in another country. But of course, I guess the first step would be improving your English, especially for the job interview stage, because that's going to be where you get, you're giving your first impression. You're trying to make a good impression on the company, on the managers. So if you can really nail that job interview, do it really well, then that's going to make a big difference. So that might include just improving your English generally, um, learning some useful expressions like we're doing today that could be relevant in a job interview, and also a little bit away from language, just learning how interviews are often done in that culture. Because if it's not in your home country, it may be different to how it's done in where you live. So I think that's something to consider too. Um, yeah, we recently did an episode about job interviews in English on my podcast, and it's fresh in my mind. So it was a fun one to talk about.
That's awesome. We'll definitely have to link that to this episode as well. I loved what you said about, so certainly improve your English and learn how to do interviews. Um, but there was a phrase that you said where you added the cultural component. You said learn how it's done in different cultures or different countries. And that would be also my next step. And that is to increase your CQ or cultural intelligence. And that is something we talk about a lot at Talaera or Talaera Talks. And it really is about understanding how other cultures communicate, how they understand reality, how you can navigate situations that are different from what you're used to, and also how to be okay when you don't have an answer, when you don't know how things work. So, yeah, really investing in increasing your cultural intelligence, cultural awareness. How do things work in different contexts? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's useful. I mean, language is so much more than just words. Also, in language learning generally, culture plays a big role. So it's always good to learn that. But I feel like, I mean, you already said that you've worked in Vietnam and probably other countries too. So do you have any more direct experience with this that you could advise on that maybe I wouldn't know so much about?
Yeah, so one big difference for me, the biggest culture shock that I've had when living in different countries is that finding out that yes and no have different meanings around the world. And the way I found out is sometimes I would use very direct questions, right? I would ask very direct questions. Do you like this? Will this be ready tomorrow? Are we going out next week? So those are yes, no questions. And sometimes I would get a yes for an answer. And then a yes wouldn't actually happen. And I was like, well, is it that they like I didn't, was my question not clear enough, or is it a language barrier? Is it a cultural barrier? And I realized that for some cultures, it is very important to save face, or to make sure that they keep harmony, they maintain the harmony within the relationship. So building relationships is so much more important in some cultures than in others, in a way. And for some people, and this was the case in Vietnam, for example, and I know it is the case in some other Asian countries, saying no in certain situations can feel almost painful. And then they would try as hard as they can to give you a different answer that is not a no. And that was a little frustrating for me at the beginning. And one of the tips that I started applying across the board, and that I always recommend our listeners and our students, is ask open ended questions at work and in life in general. So instead of saying, "Do you like this?" you could say, "What do you think about this?" Instead of saying, "Is this going to be ready tomorrow?" "When is this going to be ready?" And so just that super small change actually made a huge difference in my life in general abroad. I don't know if you've ever felt or lived a similar experience.
For sure. I mean, that's such a fantastic practical tip. That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite familiar with in Japan, for example. I don't know if you know, but it's just the same. Like they basically in Japanese never say the word no. The only time you really say no is when you're rejecting a compliment. Like, oh, you're so good. No, 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 no. Apart from that, like you never say no. If you don't want to do something, you'll just be like, I'm not sure. You kind of hedge around it a little bit. And I also, what came to mind is I feel like it's more British culture. I don't know how familiar you are with uh, British English and British culture, but I think it's very indirect compared to the more American way of doing things, where what we say doesn't always match what we mean. So we might say something like, in an interview, for example, it might be like, "Okay, so your CV doesn't look too bad," and it sounds like, okay, maybe that means it looks good, but really it means it looks terrible or something like that. Like there's a lot of hidden meaning behind the words where we're not really showing how we truly feel. Or a really common thing is underplaying everything, because I think British people are not very expressive. So if someone's having a really happy day, you don't really say, "Yeah, I'm so happy." You'll just say like, "Yeah, I could be worse." Like it sounds like they're quite sad, but actually they're really happy. So it's really hard to truly understand what you mean in the UK.
Yeah, I love that example that you shared. And absolutely. It's also interesting, right? Because right now we're comparing the US with the UK culture. And actually, what this is there's no right or wrong, there's no black or white, and there isn't a direct culture and an indirect culture. It's just what we compare it to. Because the UK, I totally agree with you, is perhaps more indirect than American culture. But when we put Japan in the equation, then we realize that people in the UK are actually much more direct than potentially people in Japan. So I love that you brought that up. And for sure, it's at first, it can be a little hard to really understand, okay, should I interpret this message based on the context, based on the culture, or should I just take the words for what they are? So, yes, a lot of training comes into play here for sure.
Yeah, it could be seen as like a massive headache, something really annoying to learn, or if you're a bit more optimistic and positive, maybe it's quite interesting to learn about all these differences. But yeah, there's a lot of them for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, we're talking about, right, helping non native English speakers get a job in an English speaking company or a global company. You mentioned improving your English and really practicing your interviewing skills. I mentioned really understanding the culture, increasing your cultural intelligence as well. I would say the other tip that's worked for me in the past, and I know some of our learners have also applied this, is to network. Um, Networking can mean very different things. For me, the first step would be to connect with current employees of that company on LinkedIn. that can really help you understand what they look for, what type of people they hire. Maybe you can even ask them for tips. What worked for you in your interview process to get a job at this company? So I think that's something that maybe doesn't come to mind when you're trying to get a job, but it's something that can truly help.
Yeah, connections are important, aren't they? Although, could I give uh, maybe not quite a counterpoint, but perhaps a case where you can go too far? Because I I meet a few people here, and it's happened to me before, where when someone is trying to network or they're trying to meet people to benefit them in their business or their career, if that is the main reason why they're talking to me, I can always tell from the very first couple sentences, and it seems really it's something about them. It just seems like fake or transactional. Like I can tell that they don't really want to talk to me. They just want to make new business connections, which for me doesn't feel very good. So I guess the thing I would add to that is if you are meeting people or networking in real life, I think it's always nice if you can first take a genuine interest in someone and connecting with someone, and maybe that could benefit you later down the line in a career or business way. But if not, that's also fine. You've made a connection. So that would be my view on that in-person networking.
You're totally right. I think we've all had this experience where someone would reach out to us and we could feel that it was for a very specific reason and not so much for who we are and for building that connection. So I totally agree with you. Take the time to invest in building that relationship, even if it's an online LinkedIn connection. It's good to feel like the relationship flows both ways and you're not just trying to grab something from them without giving anything away.
Kind of like how we first connected, right? When we first got in touch with each other, it was a bit like that. It was us both doing something together, and not like, "Hey, how can you make my thing better?" It wasn't a one-sided thing. So yeah, it works in all situations.
You're right. I like that. You're totally right. That's right. Um, do we have any other tips for not native language? I feel this could be already an episode on its own, right? Helping not native English learners get a job in an English speaking company. But is there
Yeah.
anything else that you would like to share for today?
I mean, it definitely could. I think I'll definitely come back to that topic in the future. But I guess the final thing is something that I think about very frequently, which is it could be called work-life balance, or uh, what's the other phrase? Work life. There's another one where it's like they're together. I forget what that's called, but it's like a merging of work and life where there's no balance. It's just they're kind of one and the same thing. But there's different kind of ways you can do this. But it's something that I think a lot of us are thinking about these days with the ease of working from home, and there's the boundaries between work and your life are less defined, less clear than they used to be. So it's very easy to come home from work and continue working, or maybe some of us, a bit like me, are working from home anyway. So where do you set those boundaries? So do you have any thoughts on a work-life balance for yourself or others?
It's a great question and something I'm working on, and I'm sure many of our listeners are still working on. I'm not sure if what you meant is work life integration. Maybe that could be.
That sounds like a good phrase. Yes.
I feel sometimes my life is more about at work life integration more than work life balance. But one of the tips that has worked for me in the past. And I also have the added challenge of being away from my team. I'm based in Spain. Everyone else is based in the US, some of the on the East Coast, some on the West Coast. So the time difference is really hard. So for me to really weave work into my actual life is pretty hard. So the tip that I would share is when you build your schedule, and I would build my schedule ahead of time. So on Sunday evening, I would sit down and think, okay, this is what my week is like. And when I design that schedule, I make sure that I put in my hobbies as part of my schedule. They're like part of my job. So I love to work out, and I decided, all right, when is the time where I make sure that I have time for my workout? And that happens to be 6 a.m. So now I make sure that at 6 a.m. I work out every day, and nothing can happen to prevent that other than me needing some more time to sleep. But it does really help to have that time in there to think, all right, this is the time when this is going to happen. And also trying to decide ahead of time what time is my day ending today. And I think this helps people like you and me, where we don't really have a set schedule, where we work from home and where the lines between, as you said, work and life can get a little blurry or less defined. But I don't know what works for you.
I was like smiling inside and out then because I feel like you. It's interesting how we both came to the same conclusions without talking about it before. So I do exactly the same thing. I always make sure to to schedule fun things into my calendar and make sure I'm doing that. And I think it's so easy and so common just to be like, I'm going to do this work today, and yeah, I'll go for a walk. I'll go to the gym if I have time. If I finish early, but no, I think it's nice, as you said, to put it in the calendar and treat it just as important as the other things, which is exactly what I do as well. And yeah, finishing, I always try and do that, even if I've still got work to do. Like I think today I'm going to finish in an hour or so, but I don't think I can finish everything I wanted to. But I'm still going to cut myself off, and okay, I'll do it tomorrow. No big deal. So yeah, I just want to echo what you said first of all. And is there anything else I do? I think it is important that, I mean, there's inevitably, unavoidably merging of work and life when you are working online a lot. But I do think it is also important to have some time where you completely step away, whether that's like a holiday every now and then, or ideally, 1 or 2 days a week that you just don't do anything. So I'll have some days, like Sunday, for example, where I will do emails and very simple stuff, but not much. But I think it's really important. I have Saturday every week where I do absolutely nothing work related. I don't open my emails all day. I don't do anything. So Saturday is just for fun, and that really helps me. And even if you're working a kind of a more standard 9 to 5 job, hopefully that's still possible for you, where you can say, after this time or on this day, I'm not going to open my emails or respond to my boss. They can wait until Monday or whatever. Hopefully you can do that.
Yeah, I've really tried, and I totally agree with you that having a day, ideally 2 days a week, would be perfect, where you just relax and focus on other things other than work. I've had to actually, and this has helped me a lot, I've had to delete my Slack app from my phone because
Mm.
I cannot physically not check whether I have new messages throughout the weekend. So my I guess strategy was, all right, I'll just delete the app, and that'll force me, or that'll prevent me from checking it every hour. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, I think that's another great tip, is just think about what apps you don't need on your phone. Like I don't have the Instagram app on my phone because I check my messages, but I just do it like once a day on my computer, because if it was on my phone, then I would be checking all the time. So think about what apps that you don't really need on your phone that you could just go to your laptop or whatever. I think that's a great tip.
great. That's great for sure. And the last tip that I wanted to share in terms of ensuring work life balance is to set priorities. So as I said, I would sit down on a Sunday, and if you don't have time to do this every week to plan ahead, at least do that the day before and think, what are my priorities for this day? What if I only had to pick 3 things that I want to make sure I finish? What would that be? And that's helped me a lot, because sometimes I feel like, or I used to feel like, I had been working for hours and hours and hours. But when I thought about, okay, what have I accomplished today? I felt a sense of nothingness, of I feel like I've been working, but nothing really meaningful has really happened. So when you are the designer of your day, where you really think, okay, these are my priorities and this is what I want to focus on, it really helps you get rid of all the minor tasks or less impactful tasks that we feel are urgent and we need to get done, but don't really contribute that much to your goals.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I have to admit I don't really do like a weekly plan, although I think it would really benefit me. I do a daily one the night before the next day, which really helps. But yeah, you're right. I think we call it busy work,
Mhm.
right? Where you're doing things, you're keeping yourself busy, but it's not really benefiting you in a big way. Like you might be, I'm going to clean the kitchen, I'm going to reply to this email, but you're not focusing on the big projects that you need to get done. So I think making a plan for the week would be beneficial, and maybe I'll start doing that from now on.
Awesome. But even the day before, I think you're already doing so much more than most people. So
Mm,
even creating that plan the day before really helps you stay focused and make sure that the work you're doing is not just busy work, but actual meaningful work.
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, fantastic. I maybe that's it, but hopefully people have maybe learned something new, like an expression, and maybe they're feeling motivated, or they want to make a change in their career or job lifestyle. Now I don't know, but hopefully they took something away from this.
Absolutely. I really hope so as well. So, as we wrap up, what are the next steps? How can people learn more from you, Michael? What can you offer to our listeners today?
Oh well, thank you. Well, as we said at the beginning, for your listeners, I host the Level Up English podcast. So please, you're welcome to come and listen. What episodes once a week on random topics on any podcast app, also on YouTube as well. And if you want to connect more or learn more, I also have a website where I do group classes, and there's many other courses like IELTS exam training, vocabulary writing courses, all this kind of stuff on there as well. So always very busy. How
Fantastic.
about you? Maybe you could share for my audience.
Absolutely. So, yes, Talaera Talks is a podcast by Talaera. And what we do is we offer business English training. And that really goes from the foundations of English, so grammar, vocabulary, and things like that, all the way to really understanding how to speak in a meeting, how to give a presentation, how to talk to clients from other countries and other cultures. And we do that through a combination of one on one classes with mentors and instructors, group courses, workshops, webinars as well. We have monthly webinars that are totally free for everyone to join. And we also have a platform where you can just learn on your own with courses, and you also have access to a speaking club to improve your fluency. So there's a bunch of different resources. I would recommend starting by listening to Talaera Talks. And yeah, I I hope everyone listening today did learn a thing or two.
I'm sure they did. I think I probably did as well, to be fair. But thank you so much, though. It's been really nice to chat. I hope we can do it again.
Thank you. I look forward to it as well.
You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.